Hi class, today's lesson is lesson 5-2. Purpose for today is to add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators. Now we've done it in the past with like denominators, like fractions, but today we're going to learn how to do it with unlike denominators. First of all, let's go ahead and go to our first vocabulary term, so turn to the back of your composition books. It is least common denominator. And it looks like the last vocabulary term we used, which was least common multiple, and guess what? They're about the same thing. The definition is the least common multiple of the denominators. That's what least common denominator is. It's the least common multiple of the denominators. Whether it be two or three fraction denominators that you're comparing, that's what it is. Let me give you an illustration, and yes, you have to copy this down. Here I have 1/2 subtract 2/5. We're going to solve that problem, but I want to remind you of how we worked problems that had like denominators. You can see 1/2 and 2/5 don't have like denominators, but in the past we've taken something like 3/4, subtract 1/4, and what we did was we kept the denominator in our answer, and then we just simply subtracted the numerators. So we had 2/4. When we had like denominators, we kept the denominator, and then all we did was subtract or add the numerators. Of course, we have to simplify this because we always simplify. Divide top and bottom by 2, and we get 1/2, 1/2. Now, here we have unlike denominators, and we want to get to the place where we can have like denominators. So what do? Well, first of all, let me go ahead and show you using a method which allows me to show you graphically, which is taking these two bars. One represents 1/2, the other represents 1/5. How do we subtract 1/2 or 1/5 from 1/2? How do we take a chunk that size away from 1/2 and understand what that fraction is? Well, what we're going to do is we are going to look for a common denominator. In fact, we're going to look at tenths. I know that 5/10 makes up 1/2. And I know that 2/10 makes up 1/5. If I simplified those two fractions, they'd be 1/2 and 1/5 respectively. So now I've got 5/10 subtract 2/10. In this case, it makes it a whole lot easier. Now I'm just going to focus right here. Oops, that's not a very good square. 5/10 subtract 2/10. I take away 2/10, which is the same thing as 1/5, and I'm left with 3/10. So bottom line, 1/2 minus 2/5 is 3/10. Now we're going to look at methods that we can use to quickly get us to a common denominator. Let's look at example 1. One of the most simple ways to go about finding a common denominator is simply by multiplying the denominators. Here we're going to take 9/10 subtract 7/8, multiply the denominators together, and they make 80. 8 times 10, 10 times 8. So I'm going to write down 80 as denominators and put a subtraction sign in between them. All I'm doing is renaming these fractions with a common denominator. Now, how did I get 80? Well, I multiplied by 8 here, so I need to do the same to the top because 8/8 is 1. So 9 times 8 is 72. And what do we do over here with 7/8? Well, we multiplied by 10. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 10. And what we have here is 7 times 10 is 70. So now we have common denominators. I'm going to put 80 as a denominator because it's a common one. And then I'm just simply going to subtract the numerator. 72 subtract 70 is 2/80. And I'm almost done, but I can see that they're both in need, top and bottom, in need of simplifying. And I can simplify it by dividing top and bottom by 2. They're both even numbers. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 80 divided by 2 is 40. So in the end, our complete answer is 1/40. Okay. Next example. We have the exact same problem, 9/10 minus 7/8. But this time we're going to use the least common denominator. So I'm going to go ahead and take the 10 and the 8. I'm going to quickly figure out what the prime factorization is. And then if you recall, we're going to take these prime factor trees and we're going to take the biggest base of all of them after we've written down all the prime numbers that are involved. So we have 2's that are involved, and 2 to the third is the biggest power. And we also have a 5 involved here. So now this makes it relatively easy. This is going to be our common denominator, our least common denominator. 2 to the third is 8, and 8 times 5 equals 40. So my denominator is going to be 40. I'm going to put them underneath a fraction bar with a subtraction sign. And now I'm going to ask myself, how did I get from 10 to 40? What did I multiply? Well, I multiplied by 4. So I'm going to multiply the top by 4. 9 times 4 is 36. What did I do to get 40 from the 8? Well, I multiplied by 5. So I multiplied by 5 at the top. And that gives me 35. So now I've got 36 40ths subtract 35 40ths, which equals, again, like denominators, I just transfer that denominator over and merely subtract the numerators. 36 minus 35 is 1, 1/40. And that, by the way, is what we had in the last problem, 1/40 as well. So both of those methods work well. Now we go to the complete the problem. We have two problems here, 5/6 subtract 1/2 and 1/7 plus 1/9. You're going to solve them by either multiplying the denominators together or using the least common denominator. We'll see you in class.